everyone, welcome back to the Earth on Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, game masters, enthusiasts, and guest hosts. Today, because we actually have with us our very first guest, we're 50 episodes in, finally booked our first guest. Today's podcast will feature all things canonical and chronological, because we're going to talk to Kyle, who, along with Josh, did most of the main heavy lifting on Empty Thrones, which is a book we're going to plug here for a minute or so. So with me, of course, is Josh. Say hi, Josh.
Hello, everybody.
And Kyle.
Hello, everybody.
There you go. So we didn't get any questions ahead of time for this podcast, so I luckily prepared in advance. The listeners failed us. They didn't want to ask Kyle anything at all, so I'm going to do all the talking for everybody else on that behalf. So I have a bunch of things to get to. So other than that, if you have any questions for us later on, feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Not everyone gets to be a guest. Kyle is the first. Hopefully not the last. We'll try and do one every 50 episodes or so.
I feel very honored. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. It was Josh's insistence. I didn't say no, but he insisted anyway. I didn't say yes. I'm just kidding. Absolutely fine having it. So
before we get into things, I do want to say we are going to try and avoid specific spoilers, but obviously we're talking about a product that is going to be covering timeline advancements and events that take place in Barsaive in terms of our development. And so there are things in here that are going to be talked about that could conceivably be spoilers. So just keep that in mind. Again, we're not going to get into specifics for reasons that will probably come up in our conversation with Kyle here. But
I can't spoil
just
it
be aware.
Much. It's already out on PDF.
Yeah, well, but there are some things where the game masters will want this, but they maybe not want their players to read it, or, to kind of know what's going on as they kind of prepare it for their own campaigns and their own sessions.
Well,
which
that's
is fine.
Yeah. I only read the first 2 of the 5 sections, and then I read the game stuff at the end. So I really did not even read through the last 3 adventure plots, really. So I'm specifically not keyed into those for any questions I may ask. So I'm just going to go with the overall generalities. So Kyle, I'm going to walk you through a couple of my thoughts here real quick. There are 5 arcs in this that cover things happening in Iopos, Jerris, Landis, Freewater, Kratos, a new town called Daiche, and I think even in a dragon's lair. Did I miss
think you
anything?
reversed to Daiche is Kratos' port. Mm-hmm. That's not new, but Freewater is new, and that's in Landis or nearby.
Gotcha. Fair enough. And this is mostly written for characters, half a dozen characters or so, 4 to 5, 6, of at least 5th circle. And I did read this in the epic. If you run this as an epic campaign from beginning to end-ish, you might finish 9th circle by the time you're all the way done.
Yeah, we have a lot of kind of loose adventure frameworks because for topics that you've discussed on earlier episodes, once you hit 5th circle, you kind of get a lot of opportunities to branch out, and then maybe you don't circle up as fast as another table. So if it's your goal to circle up quickly, I think you'd pretty easily hit 9th circle just with all the content in here. But if you want to pick up all the paths and all the disciplines, who knows, right?
Oh, fair enough. I just looked at it and said, that's tempting because I'm playing a character in 4th edition, not running anything. And so I sent just that one paragraph off to my game master and said, please, 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 please. I haven't read them all. Just run this whole thing. I want to do all this stuff that's in here.
Nice.
So the calendar, it starts off with, we start in the month of Mawag, which is basically May. And this runs almost a whole year. It's like 11 months of game time that could encompass what the characters are actually doing. So that seems like an awfully long time to get things done.
Well, there's a lot going on with 4, 5 major sort of plot arcs in the book, each of which is suitable to be a campaign on its own with multiple
Agreed.
Adventure frameworks in it and a storyline there, and that they are in different places on the map. You've got Iopos up in one corner, you've got Freewater, which is on the Carafad Landis border, down in another corner, and you've got Daiche, which is kind of in the middle up of the map, and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of travel that would be involved, and while that calendar, that timeline that's in the book is sort of a rough guideline, similar to how there was a timeline if people go back and look at Barsaive at War, for example, or Prelude to War, the first epic, really. that had a timeline of events that was sort of laid out there. But that is largely how, for our future development, we will kind of look at how things go forward. But for your own home campaign, your own table, you are not required in any way to hold to that timeline of events in terms of how things go out.
Oh, no, I just figured it was nice to actually put a month to the start of these events happening and kind of an end month as well. So it would take like 11 months to run the whole thing. And they do overlap. I mean, the 5, this is not going to give me spoilers the way, they're called the 5 arcs. Public Execution is the first arc, takes about 2 months to complete in game time. Yeah. And then Long Live the King takes about 4 months to run from the timeline that I cobbled together. Riotous Bloom takes about 7. Pirates and Thieves takes about 5. And Draconian Solution takes about 7 as well. So they can overlap. They actually, I think, are written in order to purposefully overlap to cause one to kind of domino effect to the next.
Yeah, you're definitely correct. The middle 3 have a lot of overlapping and a lot of different ways to hop from one plot to the next. The intro and the conclusion are kind of more solid beats, but the middle 3 very much are a hodgepodge.
Mm-hmm. My follow-up question to this. Okay, we gave everybody kind of the framework of how this is going to work. There's 5 overall arcs, takes about a year to play. Got to start off at so-and-so levels. That's usually what people look for is, can I play this now? Can I play this later? What do I have to be ready for when I get into this thing? So,
and Josh, that's a year of in-game time.
Oh,
it's
yes.
certainly possible that could take you a couple of years, depending on how frequently your group plays. It could take you even longer in real time to work through all of that material, especially if the GM takes the prelude and aftermath hooks and develops those into adventures as well. Because in addition to where each arc has several kind of broadly sketched out frameworks for the main events, there are side ideas and other hooks and whatnot that just give a lot of material for game masters to take and make their own. It is a lot less structured compared to the other stuff that Kyle has done a lot of work on, which is the Legends of Barsaive books, which are a much more structured adventure. Do you want to talk at all, Kyle, about the differences in approaching Empty Thrones compared to the adventure work that you had done on the Legends series?
Sure. I actually started my writing work in general, not only with FASA. My first written products were the Legends of Barsaive adventures, which I wrote with Michael Allegro and Carl Rubeltowski. And those adventures were originally designed to be for convention play, but we also wanted to create adventures that were really easy for people new to Earth Dawn to really begin their, experience with it. If they'd never played a previous edition, they could jump in, see how an adventure was put together, and run with it. Part of the restrictions for designing it for convention play was we had to make sure we were very specific as to how to get a whole story into only a certain number of hours. Adding on to the fact that it was for lower circle play to make it easier and more approachable, we felt like we had to really make sure that it was difficult to make like a huge mistake while you were running it. We take off a lot of those sort of training wheels in Empty Thrones because you are a higher circle. And we just wanted to say, like, these are the story beats that are going to happen. Here's a list of conflicts that you can run into. But if these aren't really appropriate for your group, maybe you want to do something else. Here's a bunch of other ideas that you can use and kind of jump all over the place. So I think they're 2 very different products.
Yeah, this feels more like a large grab bag. Because I think about every 4 or 5 sentences, something could tip somebody off to say, I should start my plot line here. This is where I can add dialogue. If I'm taking this lump sum of game product and I'm going to go make bread out of it, here's the starter I take, add some flour, add some water, which is my dialogue, my characters, my NPCs, throw it all in, and this is where you can branch off. And I think about every 4 or 5 sentences in this text of Empty Thrones does that. And so it's very, I can't say densely written, but there's a lot of information in these 200 and 300 pages or so. And it's a lot to, in a good way, it's a lot to take in. That's not like it's overwhelming. It's just one of those, where do I start? Where do I want to make sure I get that note. I want to get that note. I want to get that note. And it's a lot to take in. So let's talk about how this whole thing started. Whose idea was it?
Ooh, that's a complicated question. What do you think, Josh?
Kyle?
Well, the initial concept for Empty Thrones came about from some early conversations, if I'm recalling correctly, and Kyle can certainly feel free to correct me if I misremember any details. But it came about, I think, as some early conversations between myself and Andy Watson, our project manager and sort of den mother to the herd of cats that we are on the development team. Love you, Andy. And this was prompted a little bit by team meetings and some things that had been brought forward by Ross in terms of what is our sort of next big thing, what are we planning on? And we had, like, 4th edition, the rule books were basically out. At that point, we had Travar and Elven Nations, which Kyle worked on, and some other stuff was kind of out, and we were looking at, well, okay, after this initial Kickstarter, promise of books from the initial Kickstarter, what's coming down the line? The Iopos book seemed a no-brainer because it was the stronghold of the bad guys that were kind of laid out in 4th edition. And then after all of these other books, Quest Doors and all of that had been done, it was like, okay, well, now we've tackled rule books, we've tackled setting books. What's the next thing that we can sort of look to as a project? And that is advancing the story of Barsaive. Right? That's one of the things that in 1st edition, I think, captured so many imaginations, is that as the source books were released and as, time progressed in them working on the game, the timeline progressed in the setting, and there were changes that happened in much the same way that happened with Battletech and Shadowrun, other really iconic old FASA properties known for that. And it was basically, well, Prelude to War kicked off with this kind of situation upending event. That is the sort of 1-2 punch of the arrival of the Triumph, on the shore of Lake Ban, and the assassination of King Varulus III. Those things happening right on the heels of each other basically propelled everything that happened for the most part in Prelude to War. And it was, well, okay, let's look at a setting, a supplement that's going to do that, and what can we do that is going to have a similar kind of effect? And it was kind of looking at each other and going, what if we kill Uhl?
It sounds like the development of comic books in the 90s. Let's kill Superman. Why? Haven't done it yet.
Yeah, that it was kind of like, well, this is something that we're going to have an Iopos source book. It's going to be describing a lot of that. And if we're looking at the next step of that, the end game of that kind of whole stage of product development was to kill Uhl in this kind of, well, then we can use the Iopos source book as a place to really start to lay those hints and initial conflicts and whatnot that, one, could be used by people for their own games, but also that would then feed into the secondary product that, if you look at the covers for Iopos and Empty Thrones, you will notice that aside from the presence of Uhl on the throne, the covers are identical. And that was intentionally commissioned that way and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we had that initial concept, that was where we kind of went to the team and said, okay, who's going to be running lead on this project? And I think that's where you came in at that point.
Yeah, I think we were on one of our meetings, and I don't remember if it was Andy or you, but it was like, you said, we want to write this book where Uhl dies. Who wants to do it? And I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, a lot of things are going to have to change if Uhl dies. And you said, figure it out, and then we'll get a book together. So how many of your ideas did Josh shoot down? Well, the team in general had to shoot down a fair few ideas, but what I tried to do was from 1st edition and the time skip, there's a lot of question marks as to where certain pieces have ended up. So I tried to sort of make a big list of like 24 cool things that might happen and my reasoning behind it. And then we sort of had to talk about each one, and some of them I was way off base on. But the cream of the crop we picked and fleshed out, and while they're very different from when they were originally designed, I think they all logically flow through each other now.
Fair. So, Josh, how many of those leftover ideas are going to be coming up in other books?
Well, actually, I don't know whether it will, but one of the ideas that was originally floated in the early stages of development of Empty Thrones, which ended up getting discarded because the changes that were made, this is the Long Live the King, Freewater, Carafad Landis arc. Kyle is nodding in the camera. I can see he knows what I'm talking about. The initial hook for that, and this was one of the ideas that Kyle initially brought up, and one that I had in the advancement of the timeline, had it left vague on purpose just for this sort of thing, was what if the hook for what's going on down there is rumors that Nedin did not in fact die in the climactic battle at Sky Point when the flagship went down, and that he, like, everybody thought he was dead and he decided that that was fine and continued to do his thing, and that was actually the initial hook to get people down into that part of the province.
Map.
And that whole Nedin subplot basically ended up getting excised entirely because it drew too much focus away from what ended up happening with the development of Freewater and the whole situation there. And so it was an idea that was going to be explored and then got dropped. So it is still an open question.
I like it that way. It should be left that way. Let other game masters play with it as they want to.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember from stuff that Lou had talked about in some of the first edition development days and some of the stuff he's talked about there is when you leave plot hook dangling like that, or when you leave some kind of open question, you don't necessarily need to have the answer right away. And that gives you room to maybe attach stuff to later on.
Yeah, so I definitely thought it would be interesting to delve into Throlic politics and how they would respond to him returning, but that ended up just, Throlic politics is complicated, so would have taken just too much attention away from the main thrust of everything that's supposed to be going on.
It would have kind of felt like running your own poli-sci class in a fantasy setting, right?
Yeah.
Fair. So I'm just going to throw odd questions at you right now just to shake it up a little bit. How many NPCs did you end up creating?
Ooh, we made a list of important NPCs. I think it's 47, but then there are many others that were not classified as important just because I didn't have more than a sentence or two to say about them. So they exist and have some statistics, but so I don't know, 55, 60?
That's fine. I just want to give everybody out there who doesn't have the book yet, there's a lot of information in here to go mining for.
And many of them were created by the freelancers that we hired to do some work on this as well. Kyle was sort of the creative lead and project manager, and worked with a couple of freelancers who helped sketch out flesh out the details of the the locations that were created to save him some money.
Yeah, that
fair. I was going to say
that might be an interesting thing to dig into. Since, like you were saying, there's sort of 5 different arcs, we wanted to base each of those arcs around a different hub. And designing the hub worlds, like you said, they're very dense. We wanted them to have a lot of interesting locations, a lot of interesting characters. And I ended up tapping Carl Rubeltowski, who's on the Earth Dawn team, and I worked with on Legends of Barsaive. He did a lot of work on the Jerris hub for the Riotous Bloom arc. And then Long Live the King and Pirates and Thieves was done by a freelancer by the name of Nick Lowe, who puts out tons of good work and can always meet a deadline, which is great.
Josh is singing praises on that one. Sure. Deadlines made, yes. So
I am bad at deadlines.
That's okay. So since you were handed the reins, more or less, and there's some things in here that haven't been fleshed out before, really. I think a lot of Jerris's history, workings, and kind of a mini map, and Freewater and so forth, and Daiche. What did it feel like just to go, world build a little bit on your own? Were you reined in a whole lot, or was one of those, oh no, more of that or less of this, or how many fingers were in this pot?
It felt very cool. I kind of felt like I was given the keys to the kingdom, though after the hubs were written, I went and did some editing, did some collaborating, tried to polish it up a little. And then we had a few other fingers in the pie, like Josh helped with more editing to make sure everything fit the lore and nothing was contradictory. And Andy did some editing. Morgan pretty much everyone on the team had their fingers in it at one point or another. But a lot of the foundations, I would say, were put there by the freelancers and myself, and they're mostly still intact.
Fair enough. I was enjoying reading, like I said, the new sections just on, like I said, Jerris is finally fleshed out. Daiche and Freewater and all these other things, just adding little tidbits of, we've only had like a paragraph or a couple sentences before. Now we've got pages on pages on pages of the inner workings and the feel of a town and how it looks like and so forth. So if you're never going to run the plot, at least get the book for this, is at least, setting description at the very, very least.
Yeah, that was one of the objectives when we were kind of in the early development stages of this, was to not make it just an adventure supplement, but to also provide something that would be useful for people who handle their own plots or maybe just need a place to set them. And so giving shape to Jerris and a little bit of the conflict on the Carafad-Landis border, and setting it outside of Kratos so that we could kind of refer to some of the stuff from the 3rd edition supplement about that, but still flesh out a little area that could serve as useful. Like, that was an intentional design choice so that it would be something useful to any GM, even one who wasn't necessarily going to be playing within the canon storylines.
To that point, I have one of my questions I'm going to skip to is, so this does reference a lot of 1st and I believe 3rd edition source books that are still out there that haven't been revised for 4th edition, obviously. Carafad, Prelude to War, so we're continuing with most of that lore is still accurate. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yeah, I think that the lore as it was set down in 1st edition is pretty accurate, other than we tried to take it as accurate until we run into a reason why we think it shouldn't be, or we think this was probably just someone's opinion, and we should make sure that we flesh out the full size of the opinion. Especially something like Prelude to War, the main beats on that have pretty much happened, and if someone ran the adventure, it changed, but the main plot beats were assuming that all that occurred.
So how many source books did you have to go back and reference?
Like all of them.
Josh, your point?
Although, interestingly, I was going to point out, because I didn't actually realize this until Empty Thrones was released, apparently the Living Room Games 2nd edition Barsaive at War has a big section where they sort of have a version of Jerris that they present.
Oh, cool.
And it never even occurred to me, in part because of what I had talked about in an ancient episode about the split that happened with the development in terms of the timeline, and how 4th is kind of built off of 3rd, which was chronologically in the setting before the Living Room Game stuff. And so a lot of what they had done, I never thought to refer to it, to go to that and see, well, are there any ideas here that are cool that we can mine or reference or things like that? So people who might have been kind of going along all the way along with the different editions might run into a kind of situation like you have with Parlanthe, for example, where there was a little neighborhood of Parlanthe that was described in Mists of Betrayal, and then when the Parlanthe box set came out a couple of years later, they had to wedge this little thing into a corner of it in order to kind of keep the consistency between them. And you won't see, or how we had to kind of make sure that we paid attention to Terror in the Skies for the Travar book, things like that. But we did not, it didn't even occur to me to go and look at that sort of thing, because 2nd edition had sort of been pushed off into its own area and not necessarily being mined for material. Not that it wasn't good or anything, but it was not, because I was not really involved in any of the development.
I will say that
I don't know it as well.
I will say that I referenced Barsaive at War while I was writing it. And while the city now takes a very different shape than what it was in that book, I wanted to avoid outright saying that any of the plots that occurred there didn't occur there. I was trying to keep some degree of collaboration.
Okay.
So yeah, let's.
Well, that's good to know.
I mean, Living Room Games put out product. Not going to argue that they did not. Some of it was good, some of it was not good. doesn't matter. Everyone has their opinions on things. It was not an intentional snub, but we're taking 4th edition into the path that we want to take 4th edition. And I'm saying we, like I'm on the team. I'm not on the team.
Well, you have contributed some stuff, Dan.
2 things in the podcast. So it's okay. But I'm not in the regular development meetings. So just people can know there's a clear delineation on where responsibilities lie. So big other eyes arcing question here. What were the logistics like in making sure this could also work as a standalone series of arcs and one overall epic plot? I mean, who pulled out more hair on making sure that it all fit together right?
Yeah,
that was Kyle.
I worked really hard to try to... I was trying to look at it like I felt Prelude of War was put together. I feel like Prelude of War was put together like it has a 3-act structure. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, but it has more than 3 plots. It has a lot of things going on and going back and forth. So that's part of why I put together that timeline, and then it got polished up and put in the book, because I wanted to say, this is what kicks things off. This is how things are going in the middle. Here's kind of a big middle point. And then here's how things are going to get wrapped up, and something that feels very decisive at the end. So I knew what sort of thing I wanted to cover in each plot, but then I also knew that I had this big overarching beat that I wanted to hit for people doing the epic story.
Gotcha. So what was the inspiration behind, aside from just Ool is dead, what other sparks did you have of, that should happen next, this is the next domino to fall, this is the next domino to fall? What was the inspiration for some of those?
The main starting point was, well, if Ool is dead, everybody wants to sit on the Malachite seat. So who are the most interesting people to try to do that? And how would they manage to gain that power? So a lot of it was, well, there's a Denaristas here that we've built. Who would he poke to do what? And then in some cases, it was, well, let's make sure in the Iopos book, we talk about this Denaristas because we want to make sure that we do some stuff on the Serpent River and in Kratos.
So that it doesn't seem to come out of nowhere.
So it was kind of, cool. The tail wagging the dog in some places.
Fair. Josh, did you have any input on any of those beats? Like, make sure this happens because I just thought of it, or make sure this happens because we want to tie that into something else coming up down the line?
No, it was more that I think my direction and the kind of thing that I wanted to see out of this was that the Denaristas are known as being schemers and plotters and having long-term kind of let's you and him fight kind of things, as demonstrated by the assassination of Varulus and how that was intended to kind of pit Thrall and Thera against each other. And any time that the Denaristas show up in other places, it always seems like they're working on some kind of long-term scheme. And I wanted the stories, I wanted the adventure arcs and so forth that were going on in this to kind of serve in a way, in addition to just being good adventures in their own right, good storylines, but also to perhaps serve as a template of sorts for the types of adventures that the or campaign arcs that the Denaristas might be involved in, to serve as kind of an example. Like, okay, you may not like the specific details of what's going on in Daiche, right? But the idea that the Denaristas are doing this thing to pit this faction against this other one and to try and leverage that, using that as examples, because the Iopos book was already getting pretty big as it was, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity in that book to get into detail about how to run intrigue plots. And, okay, well, let's give them examples of intrigue plots and how they can go different ways.
So if given unlimited space and unlimited printing capability, how many novels do you think this would have actually turned into if you just added dialogue and characterization? Because this reads like kind of a set of choose your own adventures, or I would more than a trilogy. I'm thinking like this would be 5 or 6 novels just strung together, basically one per arc.
Yeah, I definitely feel that each framework could sort of be its own Legends of Barsaive style fleshed out adventure, which puts it around the 40, 50 pages if you wanted to. And we have like 5 frameworks per arc, so you can do the math.
I'm not going to do that math. I'm just not going to do that math. Back to something kind of more fun. Do you have any favorite NPCs or magic items that you got to work in just to go, that one's my favorite, Because I've written a couple things. Josh has written a bunch of things as well. You always have that one favorite that you're just kind of glum onto, going, I hope that gets made. I hope that makes the cut. I hope that gets printed. That's the thing I'm proudest of.
I would say one of the overarching favorites was Barge, the ogre who's working the port at Daiche. So he's a fully fleshed out ogre character that actually gets to do some fun stuff in the plot. And I was very excited that his role kept getting larger and larger.
Nice.
Barge is awesome. Barge is great.
I was waiting for that exact quote. So how much overlap of the NPCs is from the Iopos book? So did that make it any easier to do? Just that little section?
There's very little overlap. Even the initial chapter, Public Execution, that takes place in Iopos, I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of value there. So it's a whole new district in Iopos that's part of a larger district. So it's Counselor Plaza inside the Clans Ward. And there's just people who were not important enough, really, to be in the Iopos book, but are important enough to be a threat to a group of Fifth Circle players. So I would say that there's 2 or 3 characters in the Iopos book that are also in Empty Thrones.
Okay. So enough standalone.
Yeah, that was another thing that sort of ended up getting a little bit cut, is that there was some stuff in Iopos that was in some early ideas for Empty Thrones that didn't really fit to the storyline there, that now are off kind of doing their own thing.
Of course. They have to do their own thing.
Yeah, hooks for later.
Yeah, always dropping little things around here. Like I said, this reads, I can't say densely enough, but there's enough information. Like I said, every paragraph, every 3 or 4 sentences, where this one sentence describes another thing that's happening and a motivation behind it that could also spurn off just another little, like Josh said, another intrigue plot if you wanted to. So it's this is not just 5 overarching arcs and some other intrigue plots along the way. And like I said, 5 little alternates per chapter. There's more than that if you really want to drill down and dig deep. And so this looks like the trunk of a tree where there's many branches and little leaves everywhere. Since this is written for characters of 5th Circle and higher, and a half a dozen or so, the amount of character decisions that they get to weave through, which is maybe they're aligning with this loyalty, maybe they're aligning with this loyalty, depends upon how they want to run it. I think, and I would like either one or both of you to explain, that this really does challenge, I think, in a way that I have not seen in a while, any characters or any players' stance on their allegiance to power or their alignment to the status quo or accepting a new regime. So I think characters just can't walk into this lightly and go, I get to hack stuff, I get to get points, whatever the case may be. This really makes a player analyze their character's motivations and make some really hard decisions on where their loyalties lie. Thoughts?
Yeah. There's plenty of opportunity to hack and fight stuff too. Don't be worried about that.
No, I was just saying.
Yeah, I remember,
there. Yes.
especially in the early stages of things, Jerris especially was one that had a lot of multiple factions kind of working with and against each other at different points in the story, and trying to make it open enough so that a player character group, regardless maybe of their background or allegiance or whatever, can find something to connect to as they kind of follow that storyline through, and the shifting goals and alliances and things that go on there. And that was something I think that got intentionally added a little bit more as the Freewater and Daiche arcs got fleshed out a little bit more once we got the write-ups for those areas from Nick.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at, okay, these are the different factions. Let's not necessarily tie a player character group to only working with one faction. Let's look at the theme. Like, for example, one of the themes that's in play in Long Live the King, the one set in Freewater, is this town is kind of ends up being the important place that it is because it happens to be near where these 2 other factions are colliding. You've got the Carafod and Zaris Icethought and what she's got going on, along with the other party whose name I don't recall off the top of my head, but like that they're kind of going at each other. And then you've got Darla and the Landis Lives organization coming in there. And like just the plenty of opportunity. Although in that one, I think the bad guy faction, there's a clear bad guy faction in that one, but there's still a lot of opportunity for groups to find their own reasons to be involved, and having a lot of NPCs that can be important, that can be connections, can have players and their characters care about what goes on so that they get involved in these tumultuous times.
I'm really glad that you both see it that way, because originally when the project was handed to me, it was just under the working title Death of Wool, right? Figure it out. And then I was like, well, here are the different pieces. And then we started putting together what we had. And I realized we had a really strong theme of what happens when power transfers from one position to another. And that's why we ended up settling on the title Empty Thrones. Because the Death of Ool clearly frees up a throne, but it's a lot about what do you do when this power vacuum is here? What's the responsible way to act?
And I think the title Game of Thrones was taken.
Yes. Unfortunately, that one, I Googled it. There's a show or something.
Something like that. Kind of popular maybe for a little bit. Not entirely sure. So what was your favorite region of the map to work on? Was it dealing just outside of Kratos? Was it Freewater? Was it, since you could kind of flesh that out, were you confined by what was already going on in Carafod? What was your most fun part to work on? And then I'll ask the converse. What was your least favorite part to work on?
I don't think I felt confined for any location. There was enough wiggle room that I felt like I could use what was there as a solid base to make what I wanted to make. I think for me, Jerris was the most interesting, and that's because it touches the wastes. And the last big work that I did was for Elven Nations. I did the Western Kingdoms chapter primarily, and that also touches the wastes. So I got to sort of tie a few bits and pieces together there.
Cool. So what was your least favorite?
My least favorite, I guess, would be putting together the Carafod Landis stuff, because that one it shifted so much during the design process. Like we talked about earlier, we wanted to avoid all this Throlic politics things, so things had to change dramatically what the story beats were there. And I'm still very satisfied with what we ended up with, but it always felt bad going, well, I guess this pile of stuff is going to be not in the book. We're going to put this over here and maybe hopefully find a way to use it later.
Understand.
I do have a Skypoint and Vivane revised project in the future.
In the works.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay.
Well, it's yeah. Well, I've got Europa first. Don't get all excited. I've mentioned that that's sort of also like on my future plate, but
it is.
A lot of the Nedin stuff that got cut from Empty Thrones revolved around the ruins of Skypoint, and that's part of the reason why it ended up not really working, was because it wasn't really geographically connected that strongly to everything else that ended up going on with regards to Freewater and the whole situation there. And it was just easier to set up different reasons for groups to be down there and save the Throlic stuff for later.
Fair. How long, and both of you can speak to this, how long did this take from idea to come to fruition? Because as we've said, Josh has hinted at the Europa book and the new Skypoint and Vivane book. Those are going to be a ways out. So how long did this take from concept to execution?
I heard about the project. Yeah.
Over a year.
I heard about the project last Gen Con in August. And that's when I really had to start working on it.
So over a year.
But we had started some of the, about a year, because we were shooting to have it be the Gen Con release for this year.
And then COVID
I mean, we still kind of hit the target on that.
Yeah.
In that sense, I mean, the books are not physically ready for Gen Con. I think the recognition in earlier this year, when everything started to get canceled and whatnot, that we kind of saw the writing on the wall and knew that, well, there probably isn't going to be an in-person Gen Con this year. And so it actually did give us a little bit of breathing room in terms of, okay, we don't need to rush to get it so that there are physical books at the convention. Let's get it so that we can do the Kickstarter and have that be sort of the whatever. But I have been teasing and alluding to this project for a while.
Yes.
As anybody who has been listening to this show is aware.
What, we have listeners? I'm kidding. We have regular listeners. So let's talk about something fun, which is the word choices for the section titles. There's song lyrics in there. There's kids games in there. There's song titles in there. How fun are those to pick out? Was it just, I had this idea. I had this song lyric I wanted to work on. I mean, Duck, Duck, Goose is one of those. That's just a kid's game. So what was is it the reverse process? I have this title I want to use, make it, a story behind it, or I have the story and I have to title it. Chicken, egg,
For
egg,
most
chicken.
of them, the framework started out as like a kind of nebulous sentence or couple of sentences in a document somewhere. And then I would go back and I would name it based on those sentences. And then I would write it. And then I would say, well, is this stupid, jokey name that I have actually going to work?
It did. I found a lot of them I was very familiar with. I think one of them
There is one
Firefly
place
TV show. I found one that was a couple of song titles.
There is one place, the final framework in public execution is a bunch of deep cut Mystery Science Theater references.
Nice. I love those. And I think one's a song lyrics from The Who. You meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So I keyed it on some of those because, again, we're all geeks. We all get them. I had to point.
I think it's always fun to have that knowing nod.
It is, especially since this is in a game. This is the framework of a game, and if you're referencing, like I said, kids games, song lyrics, if you can lace in the things that you like that are in there, all the better. I'm okay with that.
And it does allow us to add a little bit of whimsy to the material, like stuff that is kind of, in some ways, kind of dark and deals with difficult situations sometimes. Having anytime that you're writing, you are, and your first audience is yourself, and doing things that amuse and entertain you is a great way to keep engaged in a project. And doing kind of silly little
and
references like that. Well, in a lot of the opening chapter pull quotes in the players and game masters guides, the people that are saying those quotes are often deep cut references for me, just amusing myself as the, like where I pulled the name from and whatnot.
Oh, no, absolutely fair. Like I said, to your point, you have to write for yourself first, because if you like it, then hopefully other people will like it as well. If you don't like what you're writing, no one else is going to like it a whole lot either. So are there any questions that I should have asked that you were waiting to go like, oh, I hope you asked that question because I'm ready to answer that, or I want to talk about this? Anything we haven't talked about you really want to talk about? Because we haven't really given a whole lot away on plot. We've done 47 minutes now and really haven't covered any spoilers or anything close to a spoiler.
Yeah, I think we've done pretty well.
And I think that's a good thing.
I will say that I think the game information chapter has a lot of really cool stuff in it. It has additional rules for how to run like large groups of NPCs, both on your side and against you.
I was just going to get there. In fact, I was going to go over the mechanics.
Boom, jumped ahead of you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I found opponent groups rules. I'm like, oh, that's a new little wrinkle that Earth Dawn's never had before, is how to run opponent groups and how to treat them en masse. So I like that.
Yeah, and most of that chapter was, of course, put together by our rules guru, Morgan Weeks. But we wanted to make sure there was a lot of really cool stuff in there for a GM to use, even if they weren't getting involved in this particular adventure. We have the opponent rules. We tried to get in a lot of high circle threat type creatures, which always eats up a ton of page count and is hard to justify in books that aren't really designed for it.
Any questions that we should have asked that I didn't ask, or anything you want to highlight that we haven't talked about so far?
I was just really happy to answer the question of what happened to, well, sort of answer the question of what happened to Ardelia.
Ooh.
Okay. So she's in here somewhere.
Yes, she is.
You might be able to find her.
It's. Okay. I mean, if you read it, it actually spells. We actually went back and forth a little bit on whether to make that blatant or not. And I think we made the right choice in making it obvious for those who wanted it, because it is a tie back to earlier editions and kind of that ongoing storyline. While there is still much that is perhaps not known about the intervening time, we have, in a sense, caught up with her, and there are some hints as to the type of young woman that she has become in the intervening years.
So what, let me ask the last question I can think of right now until I come up with another one. What does this book not have? Because I know it's got political intrigue. It's got orcs. It's got elves. It's got humans. It's got Tiskrang, plenty. It's got a little bit of the horrors. It's got dragons, by the way. Small spoiler on that one, I guess. So what does it not have?
It doesn't have a GM to run it for you.
There you go.
There is. It doesn't actually have dialogue to use. But yeah, other than that, what does it not have? As I think this literally should have something for everyone. Player, game master, budding novelist.
I think that there is something in there that any GM can find a use for in their game, even if they're not necessarily going to be running the sort of primary plot line that runs through it. I think the information on the various locations, whether that's a little bit of a deeper dive into part of Iopos, information on Jerris or Daiche or Freewater, the stat blocks for the more advanced enemies that are in there in various parts of the book, a bunch of NPCs and conflicts and ideas and whatnot that can be developed there. It's pretty clearly more of a GM focused book than a player focused book, just because of all the stuff that's in there would be of use to a game master who's going to be running things, but don't feel like, because it is ostensibly a product that focuses on the storylines of what happens in the wake of Ull's death, that if you're running your own adventures, you can't make use out of stuff that's in there.
Well, and I figure if you're playing a character who wants to be from one of those cities around this time frame or something you've called home, even just the world building and the setting description of what the town is like, what the attitude of the citizens are like, and what the place looks like, that's all worthwhile if you want to, just start writing your own character history on those things just to get a good feel for it. It never hurts to know. I mean, we all live in a city or a country or whatever, and we all know certain other aspects of those things. We've traveled to other parts of the country, so we can talk about them. This is nothing different. You can read about what's going on in all these towns just because. So all of it helps inform the player, and all of it helps inform the game master, I think. So, gentlemen, that kind of covers all the things I can think of. Any final thoughts on how Empty Thrones turned out?
I'm really happy with it. I think the sort of 1-2 punch that we had of Iopos and Empty Thrones, people kind of suspected that we were working on something big, because while I was keeping the details quiet, I was very clearly indicating that there was something big coming. And the general shape of what it was, people were talking, a year ago about, I suspect that this super secret project is probably like a campaign sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that anybody really guessed exactly what we were going to do. And I'm really happy with not only how Iopos and Empty Thrones came out, because they were sort of developed one very closely with the other, but also just the timeline of the we release Iopos, we've got the announcement of Ull's death in Dawn's comic, and then we have the Empty Thrones campaign. It all just came together really, really well, and I'm just really, really proud of the work that Kyle and everybody did to make it what it is. Absolutely, the strength of the products that we have been putting out is absolutely down to the dedication and effort of the entire team and the freelancers and all of that.
Kyle, your turn to humble brag, man.
I'm very proud with how the work came out. I definitely think everyone collaborated on it and really helped it along. So this book couldn't have been what it was without the whole of Earth Dawn team and the various freelancers who got involved. But I think it's a gorgeous book. It's got stunning art direction. It's everything in it, I think, works really well. And I hope that everyone enjoys it as much as I enjoyed putting it together.
Yeah, I think we spent the last 55 odd minutes or so trying to get everyone to actually, if they don't already have the book, go get it as soon as it's available. And if you didn't back it, sorry, but you should have backed it. The rest of us did.
So, Kyle, what's next for you?
Well, what's next for me is I'm probably going to be working more in an editing capacity with that freelancer who's so good at meeting his deadlines, Nick Lowe. And we're looking at a different province from the Theron Empire book. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say or Andy might get mad.
Nice. She has a week to get a hold of me so we can edit this out.
We won't say any more than that right now.
No. So re-exploring another part of the map that hasn't been explored in a while.
Something from the Theron Empire book.
So, yes, very nice. Josh, Kyle, thank you very much for letting me ask you all kinds of weird off-the-wall questions, both fun and deep. I hope it was enough for the listeners. If they have any questions for us, again, you can email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Final thoughts, either one of you. Otherwise, we're done.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks
Pleasure
for
to
being
meet you.
here, Kyle.
Look forward to more of your work. Until then, folks, until next time, it is time for you to go vacate your own throne and make your legend.
Good night, everybody.
Woohoo!